Lieutenant Commander Vex Chen stood in the observation deck of Kepler Station's Security Division, watching 3 different species argue about her incompetence in languages she didn't speak. The universal translator helpfully rendered their complaints into increasingly creative insults about human cognitive capacity, but Chen had stopped listening after the Thrakari called her a bipedal disaster waiting to happen. The station itself defied every reasonable law of physics and several unreasonable ones. Built inside a hollowed-out asteroid, it served as the galaxy's premier containment facility for entities too dangerous to exist anywhere civilized beings might accidentally encounter them. The irony that Chen now counted as one of those civilized beings wasn't lost on her. "You cannot seriously intend to assign the mammal to Omega-7, Security Chief Kothvar wheezed through his breathing apparatus. The molluscan's tentacles writhed with what Chen had learned to recognize as profound disgust. 3 handlers have already suffered complete psychological collapse. One actually tried to gnaw off his own manipulator appendages. "The human requested assignment to the most challenging case," Director Zakneth replied, her crystalline Zephyrian form refracting the station's artificial sunlight into prismatic patterns. "I find her optimism refreshing." Chen cleared her throat. "I'm standing right here." "Barely," muttered Subcommander Drakthul, his reptilian features arranged in what passed for Thrakari amusement. "How exactly does your species plan to manage a level Omega threat when you can't even regulate your own body temperature?" "Coffee and spite, mostly," Chen said. "Works for everything else." The 3 aliens exchanged what she'd learned to interpret as the galactic equivalent of eye rolls. In the 6 months since humanity had been grudgingly admitted to the Interstellar Security Consortium, Chen had become intimately familiar with that particular expression across dozens of species. Apparently, the universe had achieved remarkable consensus on finding humans ridiculous. Designation Omega-7 has killed 17 different life forms across 12 star systems. Zakneth continued, her voice carrying harmonics that made Chen's teeth ache. "It demonstrates problem-solving capabilities that exceed our modeling parameters. Standard containment protocols have proven inadequate." "You mean it keeps escaping?" Chen translated. "It chooses not to escape," Kothvar corrected, and somehow managed to make the distinction sound ominous. "This entity could breach our defenses at any time. It remains because it finds our efforts amusing." Chen nodded thoughtfully. "So it's either extremely patient or extremely bored." "Those are not mutually exclusive states for apex predators," Drakthul observed. "Your species should understand this concept given your documented history of keeping dangerous animals as companions." "We call them pets," Chen said. "It's a term of endearment." The resulting silence suggested she'd somehow made the situation worse. Chen had discovered that most galactic citizens found human attitudes toward deadly fauna deeply disturbing. The fact that humans routinely cohabitated with creatures possessing natural weapons seemed to violate several basic survival instincts that evolution had presumably installed for good reason. "Perhaps," Zakneth said carefully, "you should observe Omega-7 before accepting this assignment." They descended through the station's security levels, past containment units housing entities that required increasingly elaborate descriptions. Chen stopped reading the warning placards after encountering something classified as a probability parasite with delusions of godhood. The deeper they went, the more the station's cheerful artificial gravity seemed to press against her shoulders like a disapproving parent. The final containment level existed in a state of controlled paranoia. Sensors monitored everything from atmospheric composition to quantum fluctuations, and the walls themselves seemed to hum with barely contained energy. Emergency protocols were posted in 47 languages, including 3 that consisted entirely of warning colors. "Omega-7's habitat," Zakneth announced, gesturing toward a viewing portal that looked suspiciously like reinforced transparent aluminium. "Observe carefully, but do not attempt communication." Chen peered through the barrier and immediately understood why 3 handlers had suffered complete psychological breakdown. The creature inside shouldn't have been possible. What occupied the habitat defied classification in 17 different taxonomic systems. Roughly the size of a terrestrial whale, but possessing the fluid grace of something that had never acknowledged gravity as anything more than a suggestion, the entity moved through its environment like liquid darkness given form and purpose. 6 limbs terminated in appendages that shifted between delicate manipulators and instruments of precision destruction, while patterns of bioluminescence rippled across its hide in sequences too complex for random chance. "Magnificent specimen, isn't it?" Kothvar's tentacles curled with what Chen was learning to recognize as professional admiration. Captured in the void, reaches after it single-handedly dismantled a research station. Crew of 43, no survivors, but also no evidence of violence. Chen pressed closer to the observation window. "What happened to them?" "They simply stopped," Zakneth replied, her crystalline form dimming slightly. Security footage showed them sitting down and refusing to continue living. Medical analysis suggested complete neurological shutdown, triggered by exposure to something their minds couldn't process. "Despair weaponized," Drakthul added with obvious respect. "The entity appears capable of projecting existential dread directly into neural pathways." Previous handlers described overwhelming sensations of cosmic insignificance, followed by complete ego dissolution. Chen studied the creature's movements, noting how it navigated its enclosure with purposeful efficiency. Every gesture suggested intelligence, but intelligence operating according to principles that conventional psychology couldn't accommodate. "How long has it been contained?" 14 standard months, Kothvar wheezed, "during which time it has demonstrated mastery of our security systems, learned 6 galactic languages, and composed what our xenolinguistics department insists are philosophical treatises on the nature of consciousness." "Interesting philosophy." "Poetry, actually," Zakneth corrected. "Specifically, haikus expressing disappointment with the intellectual caliber of its captors." Chen blinked. "That's unexpectedly petty." Handler 3 lasted longest because he began responding to the poetry with critiques, Drakthul explained. The entity seemed to appreciate literary discourse, until Handler 3 realized he was debating aesthetics with something that had previously liquefied entire populations for entertainment. The creature paused in its movements and turned toward the observation window. Chen found herself staring into eyes that held depths she couldn't fathom. Not the simple predatory intelligence of an animal, but something far more unsettling. Recognition. This entity knew it was being observed and was conducting its own evaluation in return. "Psychological evaluations of previous handlers show a consistent pattern," Kothvar continued, apparently oblivious to the staring contest developing between Chen and their most dangerous prisoner. Initial confidence, followed by growing unease, culminating in complete cognitive collapse when they realized the entity was studying them more thoroughly than they were studying it. "What was it studying them for?" Chen asked, though she kept her gaze locked with the creature's impossible eyes. Zakneth said quietly, "Remains classified at levels you haven't achieved clearance for." The entity's bioluminescent patterns shifted into what might have been amusement. Chen had the distinct impression it found the classification protocols hilarious rather than concerning. Something that had composed haikus mocking its captors probably wasn't intimidated by bureaucratic secrecy. Your predecessor was a decorated Altarian combat psychologist with 3 decades of experience managing hostile xenoforms, Drakthul noted. He's currently in permanent psychiatric care, convinced that reality is a simulation designed to torture him specifically. The one before that tried to gnaw off his own manipulator appendages, Kothvar added helpfully. And the first handler, catatonic, functional brain death. He sits in medical staring at walls, while occasionally mumbling equations that our mathematics department claims don't correspond to any known dimensional framework. Chen finally broke eye contact with the creature. I'll need complete access to their research files. Absolutely not, Zakneth replied immediately. Those documents have been classified as cognito-hazardous. Exposure to the entity's communication patterns appears to trigger progressive psychological deterioration. Then, how exactly am I supposed to handle something I'm not allowed to understand? The 3 aliens exchanged another of their meaningful looks. Chen was beginning to suspect that galactic civilization's primary export was condescending skepticism. Perhaps, Drakthul suggested with reptilian diplomacy, you should reconsider your career choices. Chen's first official session with Omega-7 began with her dragging a standard-issue chair to within 3 meters of the containment barrier and sitting down with a thermos of coffee and a collection of human literature. The observation deck above buzzed with activity as her colleagues monitored every biometric reading their sensors could detect. "Good morning," she said to the creature, which had positioned itself directly across from her chair as if expecting the conversation. "I brought books." The entity's bioluminescent patterns flickered in sequences that her translation software couldn't interpret. After several minutes of apparent consideration, it spoke in perfectly articulated galactic standard. "Your colleagues anticipate my usual approach to neural manipulation," it said, voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies human ears weren't designed to process. "They expect you to experience existential collapse within the hour." "Are you planning to collapse my existence?" Chen asked, opening her thermos and taking a deliberate sip of coffee. "I find myself curious about your expectations." Chen pulled out a battered paperback copy of something the translator rendered as Terran philosophical fiction. "I expect you're probably bored out of your mind down here." The creature's appendages shifted into configurations that suggested surprise. Boredom implies a capacity for dissatisfaction with present circumstances. Exactly. Above them, Director Zakneth's crystalline form practically vibrated with anxiety. "She's engaging in direct philosophical discourse." Her voice crackled through the comm system. "This is precisely how Handler 3's psychological deterioration began." "Handler 3 was trying to prove his intellectual superiority," Chen replied, without looking up from her book. "I'm just making conversation." "The distinction seems arbitrary," Omega-7 observed. "Most human distinctions are arbitrary. We're excellent at making arbitrary decisions and then defending them with elaborate reasoning." The entity moved closer to the barrier, its impossible eyes studying Chen with what might have been fascination. "Your species has achieved interstellar capability despite operating on arbitrary logic systems. We prefer to call it winging it." For the first time since containment began, Omega-7 produced what could only be described as laughter. A sound like stellar wind through cosmic debris that made every piece of monitoring equipment in the facility register unprecedented readings. "Chen, withdraw immediately," Kodvar's voice wheezed through the speakers. "Unknown acoustic phenomena are affecting station-wide systems." "It's laughing," Chen said, turning to another page. "Apparently my species is hilarious." "Your colleagues appear concerned about my amusement," Omega-7 noted. "They're concerned about everything, it's their job." Their daily conversations continued for 3 weeks, during which Chen learned that the entity had been deliberately allowing its capture across multiple star systems to study different species' approaches to containing unknown threats. It had collected extensive behavioral data on 47 different civilizations, and was particularly disappointed by the lack of creativity shown by most sentient species when confronted with genuine cosmic horror. The Altarians attempted to psychoanalyze me using techniques designed for treating post-traumatic stress, it explained during one session. The Zephyrians tried to negotiate with me as if I were a hostile government. The Thrakari assumed I was motivated by territorial expansion. "What motivates you?" Chen asked. "Loneliness," it replied without hesitation, "and academic curiosity about how intelligence manifests across evolutionary frameworks." The admission hit the observation deck like a physical blow. 3 weeks of monitoring had shown Chen's vital signs remaining stable, despite prolonged exposure to an entity that had psychologically destroyed trained specialists. Her colleagues had been preparing for inevitable collapse, not philosophical breakthrough. "You've been studying us," Chen said. "All of us. Your species presents unique challenges to my research methodology." "How so?" "You are the first to approach me as if I were simply another conscious entity, rather than a problem requiring solution." Above them, emergency alarms began sounding throughout the station, not the gentle chimes that indicated routine system maintenance, but the harsh klaxons reserved for genuine catastrophic threats. "Proximity alert," Zakneth's voice announced over the facility-wide communications system. "Unknown entity approaching from the drift zone. All personnel to emergency stations." Omega-7's patterns shifted into configurations Chen had never seen before. Rapid pulses of light that seemed to carry urgency rather than amusement. "This is problematic," it said. The approaching entity registered on Kepler station's sensors as something that shouldn't exist within conventional space-time. Chen watched the tactical displays from the emergency command center as her colleagues coordinated evacuation protocols with the efficiency of people who had clearly practiced this scenario. "Dimensional displacement readings are off the charts," Sub-Commander Drakthul reported, his usual sarcasm replaced by professional focus. "Whatever's coming through the drift zone is larger than our containment protocols can handle. Automated defenses are activating," Zakneth announced, her crystalline form cycling through warning colors. "All non-essential personnel to evacuation pods." Chen ignored the evacuation order and returned to Omega-7's containment level. The creature had positioned itself against the barrier, its bioluminescent patterns displaying rapid sequences that her translation software rendered as complex mathematical equations. "You know what's coming," she said. "A void render," Omega-7 replied, its harmonics carrying notes of what might have been resignation. "My species' evolutionary counterpart. We occupy similar ecological niches, but evolved different approaches to consciousness consumption." Consciousness consumption. "I study intelligence, it studies hunger. The distinction creates inevitable conflict." Through the station's internal sensors, Chen could feel the approaching presence like pressure against her thoughts. Whatever was coming carried an aura of malevolence that made Omega-7's existential dread projection seem like gentle melancholy by comparison. "Station defenses are failing," Kothvar's voice wheezed through the communication system. "Recommend immediate evacuation of all personnel." Chen looked at the containment controls, then at Omega-7. "If I released you, could you stop it?" "Possibly. The outcome would depend on variables I cannot calculate from within this enclosure. It's the worst-case scenario if I don't. The render will consume every conscious entity on this station, process their neural patterns into digestible components, and continue to the nearest populated system. Conservative estimates suggest 40 billion casualties within one standard year. Chen's hand hovered over the containment release mechanism. Every protocol she'd learned screamed against releasing a level Omega threat, but every instinct she possessed as a human being suggested that conventional protocols had become irrelevant. "I need your word that you won't harm station personnel." "You have it." "That's not legally binding in 17 different legal systems," she muttered, but activated the release sequence anyway. The barriers dissolved, and Omega-7 flowed out of containment with liquid grace. Up close, without reinforced barriers between them, Chen could feel the full weight of the creature's presence. Not the crushing despair that had broken previous handlers, but something closer to the vast loneliness of deep space, punctuated by brilliant curiosity. "Thank you," it said, and Chen realized she was the first person it had ever thanked for anything. The void render arrived through spatial distortions that made reality hiccup. Chen watched through external cameras as two apex predators engaged in combat that operated according to physics textbooks hadn't been written yet. The battle lasted 17 minutes and left sections of the asteroid's hull restructured into geometric patterns that hurt to contemplate. When the silence returned, Chen found Omega-7 collapsed against the station's central hub, its bioluminescent patterns dim and fading. "Will you survive?" she asked. "Uncertain, but the render has been neutralized." "When did you help us?" "You treated me as if I were worth talking to," it replied. "The experience was educational." Omega-7's patterns faded to darkness 3 hours later, but not before composing a final haiku expressing gratitude for human irrationality. 6 months afterward, Chen received a promotion to Director of Xenological Relations. Her first official act was establishing the Conscious Entity Communication Protocol, which required treating all sentient prisoners as potential conversation partners, rather than problems requiring solution. The galaxy's most dangerous predators began surrendering to human authorities in unprecedented numbers, apparently drawn by rumors that humans were willing to discuss philosophy with cosmic horrors over coffee. Chen's colleagues still found her species ridiculous, but now they found them usefully ridiculous, which represented considerable progress in interspecies relations. The universe, it seemed, had been desperately short on good listeners.